When his hand slid down my back as if searching for me, sparks ran through my body, making my muscles tense with tenderness and unexpected excitement. Standing in the shade of the cabin, our hearts beat in unison, filling the tight embrace with the magic that was the beginning of a new chapter of our lives. It was an agonizing wait that suddenly erupted like thunder. As he continued to hold me, I felt his breathing become heavy and hot. He leaned closer to me, and our lips almost touched. I felt such a challenge that the world around us seemed to fall silent. Suddenly, as if by some invisible force, he pulled me with him, as if I were light as a feather. My name is Katie, and at this moment, I have never felt more betrayed. The phone in my hand kept buzzing insistently, as if it knew I was trying to escape the horror that was about to unfold in my life. I walk outside and look at the shadows spreading across the fields, a typical afternoon in our small town that has become a stranger in a short time. This is just part of the approaching chaos that was caused by Thomas, my stepfather, a thorn in my heart. With every year I spent under the same roof with him, I realized how mean and hypocritical he was. At first, he seemed like the perfect male specimen, kind, caring, like a sturdy oak tree covering our entire house with its thick trunk. My mother, blinded by his charm, married him, and it was the most serious mistake of her life. After her death, when the world finally split apart, he began to show his true colors, a stubborn egomaniac who uses people to achieve his own ends. When I heard his voice on the other side of the wire, I was overcome with a pervasive sense of foreboding. "I sold the cabin in the mountains," he said, laughing as loudly as if it were a joke, and I couldn't believe my ears. How could he have so easily undone our refuge, the place where I had spent every happy moment of my childhood, where I had sighed with relief after sultry days of despair? He said it as if he were talking about some unnecessary thing that could be exchanged for money. The raw betrayal he was plotting overcame me. "You have no right to sell it," and though I held my dignity, I could hear the hysteria in my voice. The answer was full of mockery. He wasn't going to listen to me. His laughter echoed through the tube, and it was like a nausea-inducing melody. "You'll thank me for that." That was the key point. He was sure he would come out the winner in this pairing, that he could somehow outplay me in this foul game. This vile display of power made me remember how once upon a time, in the days when things were simpler, I used to wander among the fireflies in the moonlight, how my mother and I would light lights and laugh. But now my peace had been stolen by a vile manipulator who just found an opportunity to squeeze the last juices out of our family and lock the door behind him. I crossed the room, groping the walls like I was looking for support from the dead, but I found no rest or comfort. This wasn't just a house, it was our history, a series of feelings and memories that died the moment he spoke his nasty words. I thought back to when Laura and I signed the legal document of joint ownership. I knew he couldn't just pick up and sell the house, but the senseless anger still ate at me from the inside out. The simple and lifeless "it's for my own good" explanation burned like a red-hot iron. I could feel the blood rushing to my face in a desire to destroy this injustice. Not only my life, but the memory of my mom, of what bound us together, was drowned in greed. The mind didn't realize that I could still fight. In that instant, I decided I wasn't going to let this stupid happiness ruin what was left. I remembered Laura and our agreement. It was my only hope now. He hadn't succeeded in breaking me, I would shut him down at his own game. As I grouped myself together, I realized it was time for me to act. Nothing he said could hurt me anymore. That was his last laugh, and I prepared myself to respond, at least for myself, and maybe for my mom. That bastard made my heart clench with rage. I couldn't believe that he was laughing at the pain in my heart. How could he betray me so easily? Do ties of kinship mean nothing to a man like him? The memory of our life together, of the quiet evenings by the fireplace where we'd done things together, seemed like a ghost that was no longer there. He had turned our shared past into the source of his nefarious schemes. My stepfather, instead of being a defense, had become a dangerous enemy, ready to tear to shreds everything he held dear. Anger, like a wave of the sea, washed over me. Was he dumb enough to think I couldn't survive this? That his betrayal would go unpunished? I remembered him laughing into the phone as we talked, his loud laughter echoing in my head like a tantalizing bell. He confidently asserted that I would regret it yet and even thank him. I burned with rage. Deception, betrayal, and cynical triumph, that's what I faced every minute as an evil joke loomed over me. For the next few days, I immersed myself in work and study, trying not to let my emotions take over. However, no matter where I was, the thought of his betrayal never left me. It was like a painful memory that was impossible to deal with. I wrote down my thoughts in a journal that I always kept with me. It wasn't just paper, it was my lifeline, the one thing that helped me structure the chaos in my head. Every word was imbued with a whiplash of rage, and the manuscript turned into an angry monologue. I was evaluating how I had lost my cabin, not just a building, but a part of my soul. Thomas thought he could just sell it, as if it were just a superfluous item. He was sure his deception would go unnoticed. But he was nowhere near as smart as he thought he was. I checked the paperwork and verified that no legitimate transfer of property had taken place. It was an arrangement that would have brightened my evening, even if everything around me was in lush bloom. Coming home was like entering an ominous dream. The silence that once filled me with tranquility now seemed like a stone tomb. The dampness and desolation reminded me of loss. I'd rather not go back. I'd rather be stuck in a maelstrom of hatred for Thomas. I tossed my bags to the floor and, thinking again, looked around the room full of faded memories. No sooner had I unpacked than the phone, about to protest this lingering silence, buzzed, causing me to cringe. It was Thomas. I ignored him, but then I realized it was time to face the creep. I realized that only in a confrontation with him would I find that long-awaited moment of ultimate justice. Gathering all my strength, I dialed the number. He answered with a playful tone, radiating smugness. "How's it going over there? Not too upset about the loss?" he said with vile amusement. But now I couldn't hold back. I was no longer the scared little girl he'd intimidated so easily. He had awakened a strength in me that I didn't even realize I had. I was going to show him what it meant to be betrayed and abandoned. Determination burned in my heart. I wasn't going to let him go unpunished. My backlash was beginning, and that scumbag was going to regret going against me. In this game of deception, he would find what it really meant, the determination that burned deep within my soul. It was time to get back what had been stolen. And I knew he wouldn't be able to sever what ties me to this cabin. The silence didn't seem so sullen anymore. It was an exciting harbinger of a storm that was just beginning to gather strength. I couldn't stand it any longer, knowing that this bastard was sitting in our old cabin. I gathered my things and moved like a ghost toward the place that had once been home, the world, the place where my soul had been born. When I finally arrived at the door, every cell in my body shook with anger. My stepfather, that soulless man, had killed my childhood faith in family, and now he had to answer for it. When I entered, he was already waiting for me by the fireplace. His face was contorted with anger, but I saw something else in that look. He realized what he had done. He was scared, and you could see it, like he was standing on the edge of a cliff, ready to fall. He knew that I would have loved to hurt him in response to his betrayal. But there was no lie in his eyes, just sincerity. I felt all my senses intertwine. The debt that had ruined him was laid bare before me in an invisible thread. He told me how he had fallen into the clutches of gambling, how his life had gone downhill. It wasn't just pity, it was a cry for help. And in that moment, I felt my heart fill with an incomprehensible feeling I couldn't explain. Suddenly, I hugged him. It was a completely spontaneous movement, but in that moment I realized that there was still a connection between us. We sat together, staring into the flames, as if the flames could paint all of our memories. Memories of playing hide and seek around that fireplace, of laughing and making plans for the future. This moment was filled with nostalgia, and everything I once hated was chaotically intertwined with what was good in our lives. I was going to hate him for betraying me, but instead I found something much more complicated. I realized that there was an inherent hopelessness behind his actions. He didn't want to lose the cabin. It was his last connection to something real, to the warmth that once existed in our home. And in that moment, I realized I couldn't just leave him alone. I swore to myself that I would not let this cabin be sold, that we would find another way out. I couldn't let him pay the price of our shared fate for his mistakes. We could make things right, if only he would free himself from his shackles and I would learn to forgive. It wasn't just forgiveness, it was a much more powerful feeling that was hard to explain. My heart pounded with conflicting feelings, anger at Thomas for betraying me, on the one hand, and the incomprehensible sympathy that came from the moment I realized how much this cabin meant to him. I took a step toward the door, but he grabbed my arm, forcing me to stop. His touch was unexpected, and there was some force in it that drew me back. I turned around and saw him looking at me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. His eyes read regret, but also some kind of sincerity that filled the space between us. And that's when everything changed. He pulled me toward him, and I found myself in his arms. In those moments, all the anger that had seemed eternal began to dissolve. My breath caught in surprise as he hugged me tighter, pulling me gently against him. I felt his warmth, his heart beating in unison with mine, and there was not only passion in that contact, but an understanding that went beyond words. "Thank you," he whispered in my ear, and his voice sounded slightly trembling. At that moment, his lips touched my cheek, leaving a gentle trail behind him. I hadn't expected to be swept up in such a hurricane of emotion. It was as if my anger was battling newborn sympathy in my heart. Later, his lips found my neck, and I suddenly felt something inside me boil up that had been dormant for a long time. The fear that had always tautened the strings of my senses was gone, and in its place was only unbearable closeness. He whispered his thanks, his breath light and trembling, as if he were releasing the heavy burden of the past. In that moment, I forgot the betrayal, the debt, and the fact that he had once been my enemy. I wanted to believe that he could be the man who had once given me joy, not just a man who had betrayed a trust. Inside, everything changed in that embrace, filled with pain and tenderness. I felt that forgiveness had its limits, but it didn't preclude the possibility of love. Our gazes met, and in them I saw something more than regret. I saw fear of losing what was dear, a desire to right wrongs, maybe even a dream of a new future together. It was a moment when everything that separated us vanished, leaving only two hearts beating side by side. I couldn't resist anymore. Instead of breaking the chains between us, I felt the bond grow stronger. I hugged him back, knowing that this meeting wasn't just a coincidence. Every touch awakened a desire in me that I had long hidden. I no longer just hated him for what he'd done, I began to see him as someone who was suffering just as much as I was. When I tried to pull away, he didn't let go. He kept staring at me, as if he were looking to me for answers to his mute questions. As I felt this connection, I realized that there was some invisible presence between us, as if an arrow had pierced our communication. I felt the depth of our emotional connection again, and maybe even a growth. I was ready to write a new chapter in our story. In that moment, full of passion and drama, we both realized one thing: it's impossible to simply brush aside what binds us together. And while the road to forgiveness and understanding was difficult and thorny, we had one important thing: a chance to start over. The cabin that could have been a symbol of the breakup was now filled with warmth. Here we were, together, facing uncertainty but determined to put the past behind us, opening the door to new possibilities. When his hand slid down my back, as if searching for me, sparks ran through my body, making my muscles tense with tenderness and unexpected excitement. Standing in the shade of the cabin, our hearts beat in unison, filling the tight embrace with the magic that was the beginning of a new chapter of our lives. It was an agonizing wait that suddenly erupted like thunder. As he continued to hold me, I felt his breath become heavy and hot. He leaned closer to me, and our lips were almost touching. I felt so challenged that the world around us seemed to fall silent. Suddenly, as if by some invisible force, he pulled me with him, as if I were light as a feather. We were on the bed, and in that instant, everything that had separated us before seemed to dissolve. The bed collapsed beneath us, making it feel as if time had stopped. There was a slight crackle of wood, but no sound could drown out my heavy breathing and rapid pulse. I looked into his eyes. They were sparkling, full of passion and something dark, something forbidden, something that ignited a flame inside me. I couldn't look away, the mix of emotions mesmerizing and immersing me in an ocean of tenderness. At that moment, our lips met. The kiss was light and timid, like a glimpse of first light after a long winter. But soon it gained intensity, filled with heat. Every touch of his lips gave me goosebumps, mocking the ups and downs that had brought us here. I reached for him, searching for him, as if in all this frantic world we were meant to be near each other right now. I felt his hands find my side and begin to slide over my skin, leaving behind dear memories of each touch. His warmth permeated me, lighting fires in the darkest corners of my heart. I responded to him in a way I couldn't have responded to anyone else, letting emotions flood us. As we fell onto the bed, we lost sight of everything around us, the sullen walls of the cabin, the echoes of the past, the fresh air outside the window, and the darkness that soon enveloped us. With each breath and each slight moan, we sank deeper into the world. I could feel his strength, his passion, his desire, and it was so strong that I could have sworn we were alone on the entire planet at that moment. Creating new memories, I realized it was worth it to come here, to this house that was once ours. The night was witnessing our transformation, hung with sweetness and tenderness, embracing us not only with our bodies, but with our souls. It was as if we had forgotten time, bound to this moment. His lips slid down my neck, burning my cheek, and I could feel the fire inside, releasing all the fears and anticipation that had plagued me before. Here and now, on this magical night, I agreed to let go of the past, all the oppression that clutched my heart. I was no longer someone who had come here seeking only revenge. Now I was ready for love, which bloomed like spring flowers that suddenly enveloped the cabin in their fragrance. I could feel his hands burrowing into my hair, his breathing becoming more and more labored and heavy. In every moan, I heard his gratitude and our mutual determination to start something new. In this delightful battle to rebuild, to unite our souls, we finally found in each other what we were looking for. In the silence of the night, as the world stood still, I felt that I had finally found what I had been searching for all my life. Now we had a chance for a new beginning, and this beginning did not promise us simplicity, but still we were ready to step into this unknown together. Our love, intertwined with dribbles of passion and misunderstandings, promised much. And that night, we didn't just grow closer, we recreated ourselves in those ashes, learning to love and forgive, together. We were two parts of one whole, ready to face the dawn.